Welcome to the Soil CRC's Building Technical Capacity for Improved Soil Management webinar series, Soil Pits and Data. In this video, Dr. Andrew Biggs from Resources Queensland guides viewers through how to characterise a soil pit, including planning, supporting resources and techniques for characterising different soil horizons, and how to access online soil data for Queensland.
I'll start off just with a couple of extra comments about soil pits. One of the most important things about a pit is to understand why you're using the pit. Is the pit the talking point, or is the pit just a tool to facilitate a conversation? We use pits for two different reasons. Sometimes it's a lot of techo talk about exactly what you see in the pit face. And a lot of the times you see cocky's eyes glaze over and they wander off and look at a piece of machinery or something else. Or the pit is just a pointer in a conversation. And my experience of running dozens and dozens and dozens of soil pits, it's the second one that's the more valuable exercise. Sometimes there will be very specific things in the pit that you do want to draw attention to, but I've watched plenty of people run pits where they've stood there and waxed lyrical about the subangular beds and this and that, and the pits largely are a failure as a communication exercise because everyone gets bored. So be very, very judicious in what it is that you're talking about in a pit, and be very clear in your head what the conversation is you want to have, and don't try and describe everything in the soil pit. And also, Abby mentioned sun angle. That's really important. And if you know you're going to dig your pit well ahead of time, well, then that gives you opportunity to specifically plant a certain crop or other things. Because everything's bigger and better in Queensland, this is what our soil pits look like. We even drove our ute into that one in the bottom right-hand corner. A long time ago, 30 years ago, a colleague wrote a guide to digging soil pits and photographing them. We don't use it anymore because we've learnt that in order to avoid workplace health and safety issues to do with trenches, don't dig a trench, dig a pit. They're two different things. A trench has sides on both sides. It's a linear excavation. A pit is open, and you that way avoid lots of hassles with having to shore up a trench and all that sort of crap. So if you look at the pit on the left-hand side there of the screen, you can see it's a wedge shape. And that's one from the soil judging competition we ran in Cairns recently. That's a bigger version of it. It's actually mechanically more efficient to dig a wedge-shaped pit, and it's much, much easier to get lots of people looking at it, and it's much, much easier to photograph them, and it's much, much easier to deal with variation in sun angle during the day. Over the years, I worked out that this is the optimum design for a pit. It's also a hell of a lot easier for people to get in and out of them, particularly if they're unsteady on their feet or it rains or whatever. So that's my simple diagram about how you dig a pit. I've watched a fella dig a pit like that with a backhoe in 5 minutes. Because if the ground's soft enough, you can actually use the front bucket of the backhoe even and just drive it straight in. If the ground's harder, you dig a trench with your backhoe and then use your front bucket to dig the wedge. And you can always put some little steps on the ramp depending on the material on the ramp. So those are my little thoughts on a pit. And by the way, make sure you have for your pit both a spade and a shovel, because you need a shovel to dig the loose crap out of the bottom of the pit, and you need a spade to cut the pit face back. Spade's flat-faced, a shovel isn't. And to get that nice clean face, it's always easier if you've got something very flat-faced like a spade. Cracking clay's real bugger, or any sort of clay soil, particularly if it's moist, you often end up smearing as much as picking back. That's when you resort to your geol pick and try and pick it rather than shave it. If it's a sandy soil, anything that's not terribly clay, you actually want to try and shave the face of the pit with a spade. So moving on to getting hold of soils info in Queensland. Well, if you're running a soil pit in Queensland, running a soil pit anywhere, really, you want to try and rely on your soil experts around the joint, particularly if you come from more of a generalist background, agronomist, whatever. In Queensland, the experts that you can rely on are listed here on the screen. You'll notice that there's not many people between Mareeba and Bundaberg, and that's about 1,000 kilometre distance. So people are light on the ground. But we are keen to collaborate wherever we can with people, particularly if, for example, we can get double or triple bang for buck out of the exercise. If we use it as part of our project exercises, get decent soil chemistry for the pit and so on and so on. So those people all sit in the agency that Christy and I are in. We call the Department of Resources this week. We'll probably be called something different next week. Our name changes on a regular basis. As far as the information we've got in Queensland, it's a bit different to New South Wales. New South Wales has for a long time relied on the soil landscapes concept. Queensland doesn't use that per se. Depending on where you are, you'll either have very broad scale data, which is land systems mapping, typically 1 to 500,000, 1 to 250,000. In most of the coastal areas, you've got 1 to 50,000 or 1 to 100,000 soils mapping. And in some key spots in cropping areas inland, there is also soils mapping at 1 to 100,000 scale. Even 100,000 scale, your map is not going to tell you exactly what is in the hole in the ground that you've dug at some particular spot. So always be wary of that. All of our information, whether that be the reports, technical publications, maps themselves, the original printed maps, our site data, that's all digital these days in various web portals, everything from spatial files through to on-screen viewing and downloading PDFs and so forth. We have, as with a lot of other states, in a lot of those reports, there are things like land suitability maps and land suitability frameworks. There's block diagrams or 2D diagrams of how the landscape is put together, how the soils fit in the landscape, things like that. That's roughly the coverage. So as you can see, the land systems cover pretty much all of the inland areas. Soils mapping only really covers the main cropping areas and it skips big chunks of that even. The one in the middle there, land resource areas, that's kind of like land systems. The map units are at an amalgam of soil and landscape features, but they're a very specific extension product that was produced from the 1980s into the 1990s. It's targeted very much at landholders, advisors, agronomists, and so forth. It's the plain English, if you like, version of the Techo info. It's packaged up in a manner that includes pictures of the soil profiles, general descriptions of the soils, the way they behave, what they can be used for, all presented in colour and a lot easier to read than the Techo bulletins, and very, very much the extension product. So if you're lucky enough, you've got a land management manual in your area, that's the thing really to go to. So that's examples of what they look like over time. As I said, the land management manual are colour, pictures of the soil profiles. Most of the technical bulletins don't have pictures of the soil profiles. So where do you go to get some of this info? The starting point for Queensland, a bit like most of the other states now, is a spatial web portal. Ours is called Queensland Globe. Unfortunately, we're not as lucky as New South Wales, where they were able to build a platform dedicated to their soils info. Ours is lumped up in a whole of government platform. So has its advantages. In the Queensland Globe, you can turn on everything from electoral boundaries to, you know, gauging stations to anything and everything. Our soils data is hidden in there for reasons that I won't go into. It's lumped under geoscientific information. And in there, you can switch on the point data where we've done site descriptions. You can switch on the different scales of polygonal data, the mapping. And we also have land degradation data in there as well. The Queensland Government Library Catalogue hosts all of our PDF files of reports, maps, all that sort of stuff. You can go to that, search for a publication and find it easy enough, download it. So there, for example, you know, is what you get when you open the Queensland Globe. It's like most web GIS platforms. You go and turn some layers on, you can zoom around, all that sort of stuff. Pardon me, as I said, you can see our stuff is hidden under a layer called geoscientific information. And then we have our soil sites, and then we have a different polygon scale mapping. And here you can see all the soil sites, yellow dots. The polygons are blue. I think they're actually changing color at the moment. They're going to go to black. Blue's confusing because everyone thinks it's a streamline. You'll notice on the dots that there's a series of letters and a number. All of our site data in Queensland is stored within the National Data Schema Framework, which all pertains to a project code and then the site number. So different projects done for different reasons. So you can see here, for example, there's some P2 reef sites. They're often characterisation of research sites. P2 reef is a research program. MISNQ, that's miscellaneous North Queensland sites. They could be done for any particular purpose. ICL in this case was, I think it was Ingham Canelands. It was a soil survey done in that area. So the different letters you'll see mean something. They relate to the project that work was done for. And in the globe, you can click on a site. Up here is a little toolbox thing. You click on it, you can click on the site, and then you can get the plain English description of everything that's there, including laboratory data if it exists. We do have instructions on the web, and Christy can post the URL to those to guide people how to use the Queensland Globe. The library catalogue is easy to get at. Just Google Queensland Environment Library, something along those lines, and you'll find the library catalogue that's shared across multiple agencies. You can get in there and just search it like any other library catalogue. Search for the word soil, search for, you know, Burdekin soils or something like that. You'll find what you're after. Any questions, feel free to email Christy or myself. We also have a generic soils inquiry email address that gets answered by lots of different people. One of the problems we have with soils info in general is that it's a bloody dog's breakfast. Every state has done it a slightly different way over the last 60 years. Some states are roughly similar. Some states are quite different from each other in the way that they have mapped what it is that they're mapping in the landscape, how they represent it, how much detail is in it. And then within any given state, depending on where you are, you have all these different types of mapping and scale. So if you're in Western Queensland, for example, you will only have land systems mapping. Land systems mapping is not soils mapping, it is land systems mapping. A land system is a combination of geology, vegetation, geomorphology, and soils. It can guide you to what soils are there, but the only way you actually truly know what soil is there is when you dig a hole in the ground. So that does create lots of challenges for people trying to access soils info. There's only about one place in Queensland that you can go and look at the map and have some reasonable confidence that what you're seeing on the map is what's there on the ground. And that's in the Burdekin, where we have 1 to 25,000 soil surveys. Because to be at the paddock scale, or even the farm scale, you have to be at 1 to 25,000 or better. And that scale of mapping is a rarity in Australia, full stop. And there's only one place in Queensland that we have it. So just be cautious that when you're using existing mapping anywhere in Australia, that what you see on the map is not necessarily what is there when you go and dig a pit. For example, in Queensland, we describe up to 4 soil types in a map unit, but obviously we only represent the dominant soil type as the map code. So just because we say that the dominant soil is a Waco, for example, in a polygon, that doesn't mean that that's what's going to be there when you go and dig a hole, because it could be 30% Waco, 30% Norley, 30% Condamine, 10% Bonjean. So you've only got a 30% chance in that instance of actually hitting most of those soils.
I think what Andrew said, I'd second that. That's really important information. And if you're talking to people who, if your farmers or landholders are really interested in looking at maps, just to really impress upon them that. And in New South Wales too, we also have these funny things called acid sulfate soil risk maps. So they're the risk of finding acid sulfate soils there, not necessarily that they will be there or at any depth. And so people often get those really confused. And just to, make that really, make that point really strongly, because I think people get a bit confused about all that.
Yeah, and I mean, I gave the example before of the Burdekin. Even the Burdekin has its issues because the soil surveys were done pre-development. And as part of development, they did an enormous amount of earth moving and land planing. And so there's been serious modification of the soils down to depths as deep as 70 centimetres.
Yeah.
So what was mapped is not necessarily what's there today. But, you never know until you dig a hole, is what it all boils down to. Don't get uptight about the fact that you've dug a hole and it says something different to what the map says, because the map's just a guide to get you to a particular point in space if you're looking for a certain soil type. The map is not necessarily the way that you will choose a site to go and dig a soil pit, because the way that usually occurs, it's the same everywhere in Australia. Friendly cocky, preferably a friendly cocky with his own excavator or backhoe. So it comes back to that question of why am I digging a pit at this point in space? What's the conversation that is going to be had at that pit, and how much does it relate to the pit or features in the profile? How much does it relate to the landscape surrounding it? How much does it relate to the physical properties of that pit face, or that soil type? Or are you interested in talking about the chemical properties of it, fertility, nutrition, and so on? All of those things are, of course, linked. As Abby, described earlier, you can't stand there and talk about one without talking about all the others, whether it's the biology, the morphology, the colour of the soil, you name it. Colour is where I always start with, because you can tell 90% of the things about a soil profile by its colour.
Thank you for watching. If you found this information useful, there are many more related projects to discover at our website. Please like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more Soil CRC webinars, project updates, and conference presentations. This webinar series was produced by the Soil CRC, jointly funded through the Australian Government's National Landcare program, to build the technical capacity of natural resource management agencies, Landcare and grower groups to deliver soil health information to farmers for improved soil management. For more information about our projects, visit soilcrc.com.au.